5 distinct horrors haunted American soldiers in the unforgiving jungles of Vietnam, with perhaps the most chilling being the talking bush. These were the nightmares veterans specifically asked us to recount, the persistent specters that still torment their sleep, even 5 decades later. What you are about to hear isn't the sanitized narrative found in history textbooks. This is the raw, unvarnished reality, delivered directly from the very soldiers who survived to tell their tales. If you believe you already understand what terrified servicemen in Vietnam, prepare to discover something entirely new. But if you've served and confronted these very threats, then you already grasp the profound truth we aim to convey. What awaits you is the story of the 5 most brutal predators in the verdant jungle, creatures that transformed Vietnam into a zone of biological warfare, where the enemy was not always human. These organisms killed, maimed, and psychologically devastated American troops in ways no military training could possibly have prepared them for. Let's delve into these chilling accounts. Between 1965 and 1973, more than 2.7 million American soldiers were deployed to Vietnam. Military psychiatric studies from that era unveiled a disturbing truth. When questioned about their greatest fears, combat veterans consistently ranked certain jungle threats above even human adversaries. Declassified medical reports from the 93rd Evacuation Hospital indicate that the toll of non-combat biological casualties reached levels so extreme that some details remain classified even today. The jungle itself became an enemy that never slept, never retreated, and showed no quarter regardless of rank or experience. These were not isolated incidents. They were the daily realities faced by every soldier operating within the triple canopy jungle. The military survival manuals issued to troops contain more pages on biological threats than on Viet Cong tactics. The psychological pressure was immense. You could be the most skilled, most effective soldier in your platoon, yet still perish, screaming in agony, from something you couldn't shoot. Here are the 5 predators that truly defined the biological warfare aspect of Vietnam. A bitter irony quickly emerged. The very foliage that offered concealment from enemy fire often served as the lurking ground for an unseen, silent assassin. Let's analyze why this became such a pervasive fear that it fundamentally altered how soldiers moved and operated in every jungle environment. The bamboo pit viper, ominously nicknamed the two-step snake by American GIs, epitomized the evolutionary perfection of ambush predation. These serpents achieved 100% camouflage within the dense Vietnamese bamboo thickets. Their green bodies were virtually indistinguishable from the surrounding foliage. They operated at a vegetation height of 3 to 6 feet, precisely the zone where soldiers maintained their focused gaze during patrols. Military medical data from 1968 alone documented 397 instances of bamboo pit viper attacks on American personnel in 3 corps. Their venom caused immediate hemorrhagic necrosis, leading tissues to begin dying within a mere 8 to 12 minutes post-bite. A field nurse vividly described finding a victim. The swelling started immediately, spreading rapidly up the limb as if someone was pumping air under the skin. Only the skin turned a deep purplish black as it distended. Every bamboo cluster thus became a potential death trap, forcing soldiers to choose between tactical concealment and biological safety. The snake's heat-sensing organs allowed them to detect a soldier from up to 18 inches away, meaning they were always aware of an approaching presence. Veterans frequently recounted their terrifying efficiency. The snake would strike, inject venom through its 6 to 8 millimeters fangs, and vanish back into the bamboo before the soldier could even register the bite. One Marine once recalled, "You'd hear a scream, and when you turned, there was nothing there. Just your buddy holding his leg, the wound already swelling like a baseball." We learned to fear the bamboo more than bullets. Standard jungle boots offered absolutely no protection, as bamboo pit vipers frequently struck the calf and thigh in up to 73% of cases. According to MACV medical statistics, the average medevac response time in dense jungle terrain ranged from 45 to 90 minutes, far exceeding the critical treatment window for pit viper envenomation. The psychological impact was utterly devastating. Soldiers were forced to watch their own flesh turn black and die while awaiting evacuation, confronting the grim reality that survival might entail limb amputation. A distinct, putrid odor would soon begin to emanate. The smell of necrotic tissue mingled with the coppery tang of hemorrhage. A field surgeon remembered. Guys would come in with limbs swollen to twice their normal size, skin splitting open from the internal pressure, begging us to cut it off before the necrosis spread to vital organs. Between the intense physical agony and the psychological horror of witnessing one's own body decaying, the bamboo pit viper's bite crippled the fighting capability of even those who survived. And that was just the beginning. Despair set in as soldiers realized their boots, their training, their weapons, all were utterly useless against this predator. Let's further analyze why this became such a pervasive fear that it made even sleep a deadly gamble. The Malayan pit viper operated with deadly precision under the cover of night, utterly eradicating any notion of safe rest. These snakes, typically 36 to 48 inches long, possessed thermal sensing capabilities accurate to within 0.5 degrees Celsius at a range of 24 inches. Military incident reports recorded 612 nocturnal attacks between 1969 and 1970 across all combat zones. Their venom induced systemic coagulopathy. Blood completely lost its ability to clot, leading to internal hemorrhaging that could persist for up to 72 hours post-bite. Soldiers would bleed from their eyes, nose, ears, and even old wounds as their body's clotting factors were depleted. A field hospital record noted, patient admitted 6 hours post-bite bleeding from every natural orifice, including old mosquito bites, plasma, and whole blood transfusions ineffective in restoring coagulation. Standard defensive perimeters offered no protection whatsoever, as Malayan pit vipers actively hunted warm-blooded prey. At night, these snakes would infiltrate sleeping areas, drawn by body heat, and strike exposed skin, typically the face, neck, and hands. Infantry teams maintained 50% staggered watches, meaning half the unit was always vulnerable at any given moment. The psychological terror was absolute. Sleep became a potential death sentence. An ordnance specialist described the paranoia. You'd be lying in your hammock, and every rustle of leaves would make your heart pound like crazy. You'd shine your flashlight, see nothing, try to sleep, then feel something moving on your chest. I saw guys go 3 to 4 days without real sleep, just dozing off in terror. And they were more dangerous to us than effective in combat. Nighttime casualty reports indicated that 23% of non-combat medical evacuations stemmed from Malayan pit viper encounters. The coagulopathy created situations where even minor injuries became fatal and old wounds spontaneously reopened. Soldiers who survived the initial bite faced 48 to 96 hours of medical crisis, where any physical trauma could trigger uncontrolled bleeding. The psychological impact transcended mere fear. It fostered utter helplessness. You could be evacuated, treated with anti-venom, and still succumb to hemorrhage 3 days later simply because a dental filling dislodged. A Navy nurse recounted, I watched a private bleed from his gums after a Malayan pit viper bite. We stopped the external bleeding, thought he was stable. Then his mouth filled with blood, and he drowned in it. There was nothing we could do. The smell of blood became a permanent fixture in the field hospitals, thick and coppery sweet, mingling with the jungle's humidity. This predator didn't merely attack, it delivered a curse. An omnipresent and invisible threat materialized when soldiers realized the jungle's dominant predator regarded humans as mere territorial invaders. Let's examine why this became such a pervasive fear that aggression itself became a survival instinct. The king cobra represented the ultimate biological weapon of the jungle. Reaching lengths of 12 to 18 feet, these formidable serpents delivered a potent neurotoxic death and actively defended their territory against human encroachment. A single bite from these snakes could inject 400 to 500 milligrams of venom, enough to kill 20 adult humans or fell an Asian elephant within 3 hours. Army wildlife encounter logs recorded 89 confrontations with king cobras between 1967 and 1968, with 34 resulting in fatalities. The venom directly attacked the nervous system, causing progressive paralysis that began with the diaphragm and respiratory muscles. Victims remained fully conscious as their bodies gradually succumbed, unable to move or breathe, their minds screaming in silent despair. A battalion surgeon described the clinical progression. They would come in talking, telling us exactly what happened. Then, within 15 minutes, they couldn't move their arms. 20 minutes later, they couldn't breathe. 25 minutes later, they were just eyes staring at you, pleading, while we manually bagged them for air. Unlike other snakes that typically retreated when encountering humans, king cobras stood their ground and advanced when threatened. They could raise a third of their body length off the ground, positioning their fangs at chest height for an average soldier. The flaring of their hood became an unmistakable, menacing display, spanning 12 to 18 inches across. Combat reports detailed American soldiers encountering king cobras that refused to yield, forcing entire patrols to either halt their advance or engage in direct confrontation. An infantry sergeant recalled the sheer terror. That thing stood up straight to my chest, spread its hood, and hissed loud enough to hear over the jungle noise. It wasn't scared. We were. It started moving toward us, and our point man emptied an entire M16 magazine into it. Even as it was dying, it struck twice, biting his shoulder. He died in the chopper, paralyzed but fully conscious, trying to scream with frozen vocal cords. The neurotoxic venom inflicted a uniquely horrifying death, a fully lucid consciousness trapped within a defunct body. Military medical protocols mandated manual ventilation for king cobra victims, as mechanical ventilators were unavailable at forward operating positions. This meant medics had to continuously squeeze manual resuscitation bags for hours on end, all while witnessing the soldiers slowly and agonizingly draw their last breath. The psychological toll on both victim and medic was utterly devastating. The victim could see, hear, and feel everything while drowning in their own saliva, utterly unable to swallow. A field medic recounted, "I bagged a kid for 4 hours straight waiting for the chopper. He was 19, and I watched the life leave his eyes while his brain was still active. He knew he was dying, and neither of us could do anything but keep squeezing that bag." The king cobra's hiss, audible from 30 feet away, became an auditory signal capable of freezing entire patrols in their tracks. And the jungle still held more horrors. A suffocating horror emerged when soldiers discovered their sleeping areas had been breached. Let's analyze why this became such a pervasive fear that it turned night into an enemy itself. The Malayan kite represented the epitome of stealth predation, honed over millions of years of evolution. These snakes, typically 3 to 5 feet long, were jet black and moved silently across any terrain. Their hunting strategy targeted sleeping humans, specifically drawn by body heat and carbon dioxide emissions. Casualty reports from military bases recorded 156 kite bite incidents between 1968 and 1971 at established firebases with active security. Their venom combined both neurotoxins and myotoxins, causing simultaneous paralysis and muscle tissue destruction. A soldier would awaken to complete respiratory paralysis, unable to cry for help, unable to move, feeling their chest muscles disintegrate while their mind remained perfectly lucid. A base medical log noted, "Patient discovered at 0600 during routine bunk check, alive but completely paralyzed, eyes still tracking movement. Bite occurred approximately 0200 based on tissue necrosis progression. Patient expired at 0645 due to respiratory failure after 4 hours and 45 minutes of conscious paralysis." Malayan kites actively sought out confined sleeping spaces, transforming standard sleeping bags and hammocks into preferred hunting grounds. The snakes would crawl into occupied sleeping bags, coil into the soldiers' warmth, and strike when the humans shifted in their sleep. Defensive measures proved utterly ineffective. Insect nets, elevated sleeping positions, and perimeter guards made no difference. The psychological impact annihilated the sleep discipline of entire units. Soldiers developed insomnia, preferring exhaustion over vulnerability. An artillery specialist described the paranoia. You check your sleeping bag 10 times, shake it out, lie down, and then every fold of the fabric felt like a snake. I slept sitting up for 7 months, propped against ammo crates because I couldn't force myself to lie flat. I'd rather face incoming artillery rounds while awake than deal with one of those things in my bunk. Mental health reports from bases indicated that 41% of American soldiers exhibited sleep disorder symptoms consistent with environmental anxiety disorder. The myotoxic component of crite venom liquefied muscle tissue at a cellular level, causing rhabdomyolysis, which released muscle fiber components into the bloodstream. This resulted in secondary kidney failure in 67% of crite bite victims who survived the initial paralysis. The pain was described as an internal burning sensation, like acid dissolving muscles from the inside out. Soldiers remained conscious throughout the ordeal, feeling their own bodies self-destruct. A battalion surgeon recounted, "We had crite victims lying in the ward, unable to move, but able to feel everything. They described the sensation of their muscles turning into hot liquid under their skin, their urine turning dark brown from muscle proteins, and we had to watch their kidney function collapse while they were fully aware through it all. The stench of necrotic muscle, both sweet and putrid, became the defining odor associated with crite bites. And yet, there was another horror. The inescapable terror became chillingly clear when soldiers realized that even the water offered no sanctuary from this particular predator. Let's delve into why this fear was so pervasive it completely eradicated any concept of a safe zone. The banded crite operates with equally lethal efficiency in both terrestrial and aquatic environments. Measuring 4 to 6 feet long and identifiable by their distinctive black and yellow bands, these insidious snakes hunted in rice paddies, rivers, and stagnant pools, precisely where soldiers conducted their operations and sought to replenish their water supplies. Military environmental hazard reports documented 203 encounters with banded crites during riverine operations in the Mekong Delta between 1966 and 1970 alone. Their venom, a potent neurotoxin, is 15 times more powerful than that of a cobra, inducing complete neuromuscular paralysis within a mere 25 to 40 minutes. Soldiers bitten while wading through water would often die midstream, their paralyzed bodies sinking slowly while their minds remained horrifyingly conscious of the impending drowning. A river patrol boat operator vividly recalled, "We pulled a soldier out of the water, and he was still alive, eyes open, but his body was completely rigid." A nurse confirmed he had been bitten by a banded crite while wading. The soldier drowned in 3 feet of water, fully conscious, muscles locked, unable to lift his head above the surface. Banded crites effectively contaminated every available water source, transforming the simple, vital act of hydration into a calculated, potentially fatal, risk. During operations, standard water purification tablets proved utterly ineffective against their venom, and visual inspection was impossible in the delta's murky, opaque currents. Soldiers faced an agonizing, impossible choice: succumb to debilitating dehydration or risk potential poisoning every single time they refilled their canteens. The psychological pressure was relentless, an ever-accumulating burden. Casualties due to heat stroke from dehydration surged by 34% in units operating in crite-infested areas, largely because soldiers delayed drinking water out of profound, paralyzing fear. A Marine Reconnaissance Force member described the untenable dilemma. You're carrying 80 pounds of gear in 95-degree heat with 90% humidity. You're losing water through sweat faster than you can replenish it. But you saw what happened to Jackson when he filled his canteen from that stream. A banded crite in the water had bitten his arm. He died in 30 minutes, literally drowning on dry land, because his lungs simply stopped working. Medical reports corroborated 23 deaths directly attributed to respiratory paralysis caused by kite venom during water foraging missions. This neurological paralysis created the ultimate horror, drowning while fully aware, even in the absence of water. Diaphragmatic paralysis meant soldiers suffocated as their brains remained agonizingly active and conscious. They could see rescuers, hear voices, feel hands touching their bodies, yet they were unable to communicate, unable to breathe, unable to halt the encroaching darkness. Their final moments were filled with raw panic, absolute terror, and utter helplessness. A Navy nurse recounted, "Kite victims had a distinct look in their eyes. Pure, unadulterated fear. They'd grasp your hand with what little strength they had left, squeezing with desperate intensity, trying to tell you they were still in there as their lungs gave out. You'd watch the light slowly fade from their eyes, and you knew they were conscious until the very last second, experiencing every agonizing moment of suffocation." The strained, gasping breaths became a haunting sound that tormented nurses for decades. Survivors described the sensation as drowning in air, desperately attempting to breathe, but with a body utterly unresponsive and betraying them. The most profound terror, however, bore a peculiar name: the talking bush. Frederick Whitehurst, a U.S. soldier who later revisited Vietnam, recounted a chilling incident during combat against the Liberation Army. Suddenly, a bush moved. Every American soldier froze in horrified dread as they discovered an 18-year-old North Vietnamese soldier, both legs mangled, crawling forward on his hands, defiantly refusing to surrender. Another story shared by this veteran involved him shooting a young girl wearing a military-style belt. She flinched but remained upright. He fired 15 more rounds into her, yet she wouldn't fall, only succumbing when an M79 grenade was directly deployed. The veteran's immediate reaction was pure, gut-wrenching fear, not of a single defeated enemy, but of the terrifying realization that for every bush they eliminated, hundreds, even thousands more, were ready to emerge and launch themselves at them. One of the most popular destinations for Americans in Vietnam today is the Cu Chi tunnels, a classic and harrowing testament to the talking bush phenomenon. Americans could scarcely believe that the Vietnamese had constructed such an immense and intricate underground network so close to Saigon. This colossal engineering feat instilled profound dread in U.S. forces, as Liberation Army soldiers could materialize from one entrance, strike swiftly and decisively, and then vanish without a trace. General Harold Moore, who commanded at the Battle of Ia Drang, revealed in his memoir that he described the Liberation Army soldiers as true warriors. They would emerge from the terrain, skillfully utilizing the landscape and natural cover with clear organization, striking the enemy's flanks. That battle is also considered the origin of General Nguyen Chi Thanh tactical concept of clinging to the enemy's belt to fight. These liberation soldiers were ready to shout, charge, and plunge bayonets into American troops with fierce determination. That particular battle was a crushing defeat for the American forces, yet in the film, We Were Soldiers, ostensibly based on General Moore's memoir, all details about the Liberation Army were glaringly omitted. Instead, they were depicted as weak, foolish troops who relied solely on human waves to charge suicidally into American gunfire, portrayed as barbaric and brutal individuals fighting without any discernible purpose or strategy. The film even included fabricated images, portraying Viet Cong commanders as bloodthirsty, ruthless figures devoid of conscience. Journalist Joe Galloway, a war correspondent who experienced that battle firsthand, wrote, "North Vietnamese soldiers were right in the American ranks and perched high in the trees. Any American soldier who moved would be shot. Despite calling for overwhelming air support, the dense bushes, impenetrable foliage, and the Liberation Army's sudden, devastating ambushes caused American forces to inadvertently bomb their own positions, resulting in casualties for both American and Liberation forces." You know the movie Home Alone, right? Where burglars are ingeniously thwarted by a child's homemade traps and masterful camouflage. Now, imagine the Vietnam War was eerily similar, but on a scale tens of thousands of times greater and with far deadlier stakes. The Americans found themselves utterly disoriented, spun around like a top, and forced into a perpetually reactive stance, transitioning from controlling the game to playing by someone else's rules. In the early stages of the Vietnam War, American media ran strange news stories about the fears of U.S. soldiers. Strange because they didn't focus on the cacophony of bombs and bullets or gruesome images of bloodshed. Instead, they spoke of incredibly mundane things common even in America: worms, crickets, flies, snakes. Even the seemingly innocuous sound of a falling branch or a gentle gust of wind would startle them, prompting American soldiers to unleash barrages of gunfire into empty, silent space, regardless of the heightened risk of revealing their own positions. Naturally, when these reports first emerged, Americans back home were deeply skeptical, failing to comprehend, until the first groups of battle-hardened soldiers returned, bringing these haunting, insidious nightmares home with them. In reality, the Americans lost because they were consumed by fear, a profound, pervasive dread they had never encountered in Europe, Korea, or the Pacific Theater. They lost due to psychological obsessions that didn't just stem from the enemy soldiers. They lost because they were fighting against the very essence of Vietnam itself, not merely the Vietnamese people. America's true adversaries included the grass, the meandering streams, the whispering wind, the croaking frogs echoing through the jungle, and of course, punctuated by the chilling, staccato bursts of AK-47 fire. The most terrifying death is often one that comes slowly, inexorably, with no chance of resistance. If given a choice, most would opt for the sudden oblivion of a stroke rather than the protracted agony of cancer. Because cancer slowly, agonizingly, devours a person, from spirit to body, from flesh to soul, leaving a trail of suffering for all who witness it. The psychological uniqueness of biological warfare in Vietnam stemmed from its sheer unpredictability and its relentless inevitability. While direct combat was intermittent, the jungle's hostile presence was constant and omnipresent. Every moment spent outside fortified positions meant acute exposure to predators that could claim a life regardless of a soldier's combat skill or experience. The official casualty figures tell a grim story often overlooked by military historians. Non-combat biological casualties in Vietnam totaled 8,734 recorded cases from 1965 to 1973, with an estimated number of unreported incidents potentially doubling that harrowing figure. Among the recorded cases, 256 individuals suffered either death or permanent, life-altering disability. These were not acceptable losses to be dismissed. These were entirely preventable tragedies, born from deploying young men into a treacherous environment against which their standard military training and equipment offered no true defense. The psychological impact wasn't limited to individual trauma. It spread insidiously, eroding the very cohesion of the unit. When your foxhole buddy succumbed to a bamboo viper bite, the last vestiges of trust in your immediate surroundings utterly collapsed. These weren't just seasoned soldiers grappling with tactical challenges. These were primarily young men, with an average age of just 19, confronted with biological horrors their high school science classes had never remotely prepared them for. They were sons riding home, describing venomous snakes lurking in their sleeping bags. They were husbands who developed debilitating insomnia that tragically ruined their marriages. They were fathers who found themselves unable to take their children camping years later, because the innocuous smell of canvas could trigger terrifying panic attacks, unleashing flashbacks of the jungle's oppressive embrace. The statistical casualties represent not just numbers, but real brothers, friends, and neighbors who experienced death by drowning on dry land, paralysis while fully conscious and aware, or watched in horror as their own tissue necrosed right before their eyes. Their grieving families received sterile telegrams explaining their loved ones' deaths as non-combat casualties, a dry, bureaucratic administrative phrase that chillingly sanitized the raw horror, the profound suffering, and the unique, biological war these courageous soldiers had been forced to endure. The lingering trauma continues to manifest within the Veterans Affairs (VA) hospital system today, where aging Vietnam veterans still receive treatment for severe anxiety disorders and other psychological ailments stemming directly from the environmental aggressors and unseen enemies encountered 5 decades ago. To every veteran who faced these biological nightmares alongside human adversaries, your service, your survival, and your profound willingness to share these often unspoken experiences are profoundly important and deeply appreciated. The horrors you confronted in the Vietnamese jungle were undeniably real, meticulously validated by military medical records and extensive psychiatric research. If you served in Vietnam and courageously encountered these elusive predators, your powerful testimony in the comments section will help younger generations truly understand what it meant to fight in that brutal and psychologically devastating conflict. If this video helps you better comprehend what your father, grandfather, or uncle went through, please hit the like button and subscribe for more authentic military history. In hindsight, looking back at all that transpired in Vietnam, the American soldiers' pervasive fear of those talking bushes ultimately became the root cause of the most ignominious defeat in the history of the mighty United States military to this very day.